Welcome to the Layer Cake, Purity Coffee's unique approach to supporting our coffee producers and promoting sustainability. At Purity Coffee, true sustainability goes beyond just coffee. It's about creating a thriving ecosystem where farmers can diversify their crops and income, ensuring long-term stability and prosperity. The Layer Cake method describes how our producers avoid relying solely on coffee beans for income. By introducing a variety of crops and sustainable practices, they create multiple layers of income and opportunity, much like the layers of a cake. One of the layers in our layer cake is honey production. Beekeeping provides additional income for our farmers and plays a crucial role in pollinating coffee plants and other crops, enhancing overall farm productivity. Livestock farming is another integral part of our layer cake. Raising animals provides meat, milk, and other products and offers natural fertilizers for our crops, promoting a circular, sustainable farming system. The implementation of biochar has been an exceptional input for producers to improve their soils and maintain a high level of production and quality. Renewable energy is also a key component of our sustainability efforts. By utilizing solar and other renewable energy sources and lower energy costs, making farming operations more efficient and environmentally friendly. The layer cake is more than just a method. It's a philosophy of interconnectedness and resilience. By supporting our coffee producers in diversifying their crops and income, Purity Coffee is helping build a sustainable future for farmers, their families, and the environment. Join us in supporting a sustainable future. Choose Purity Coffee, where every cup supports a thriving ecosystem and a prosperous community.
Welcome to Sovereign Sisters Podcast. This is a show where we break down the complex stuff that affects your life in a way that actually makes sense. I'm your host, Angela Atkins of YourHealthUnbound.com, and today we're diving into something that impacts every single American from birth to death: taxes. Now, you might just think you pay income tax, but in reality, there's a complex web of federal, state, and local taxes taking a cut of your earnings, purchases, property, and even your inheritance. Today, we're walking through every major tax you may pay during your lifetime and the story behind how they came to be. So by the end of this episode, you'll not only know what you're paying, but why you're paying it. So let's move on and talk about taxes on your income. Now, there's federal income tax, which we pretty much know. This was established by the 16th Amendment, ratified on February 3rd, 1913, granting Congress the authority to levy taxes on income without apportioning it among the states. Now, it started off modestly, but it grew quickly into the primary source of federal revenue. However, there's been persistent claims questioning the legitimacy of the 16th Amendment's ratification. Now, these arguments often stem from a book published in 1985 by Bill Benson and M.J. Red Beckman, titled The Law That Never Was. They alleged that procedural irregularities, such as variations in wording, pronunciation, or capitalization in the ratification documents submitted by different states, invalidated the process. Benson claimed to have found evidence that some states did not properly ratify the amendment due to these discrepancies or because their state legislators did not follow the proper procedures. Well, leaving that aside, many Americans are paying income taxes based on the 16th Amendment, so let's use that as the premise for this purpose. The reason to create income taxes originally were to finance the Civil War, and it created one of the first versions of federal income tax in 1862. Well, in the earliest days, less than 1% of Americans had to pay the tax. And of course, there's been major tax reforms been going on for decades. Well, in addition to federal tax, we have the state income tax. And this is post-1913. Most states followed the federal lead, with 42 states now imposing their own income taxes. Now, the rates and structures vary widely. Some use a flat tax, others have brackets. But then there's also the self-employment tax, SECA. This was established in 1951. This tax requires self-employed individuals to pay both the employee and the employer portions of the Social Security and Medicare taxes. Isn't that government double dipping? Then there are corporate income taxes. Now, these were first introduced in 1909. This tax was levied on the net income of corporations. Now, it predated personal income tax, and it remains a key, if controversial, revenue source. Now, another one is the capital gains tax. This was enacted under the Revenue Act in 1921. It introduced preferential treatment for capital gains to encourage investment. Now, capital gains or taxes, the capital gains taxes apply to the profits from selling assets like stocks or real estate. Long-term gains typically enjoy lower rates. Now, a capital gain is defined as a profit made from the sale of that asset, whether it's a property, a home, furnishing, stocks or bonds or whatever, minus the amount you paid for it, which includes all the costs, including taxes, shipping, installation, home improvement, etc. So it can be a little complex. But then we also have interest and dividends tax. Now, these are filed as income on the federal tax return. It includes interest on bank accounts, dividends, interest on loans, money someone gives you or gives out, and so much more. And any interest from a savings account or dividends from stocks must be reported as income and taxed accordingly, though there are some municipal bonds that are exempt. Now, there's rental income. So if you earn money for renting out a property, it's considered taxable income. Deductions are allowed for expenses like maintenance or mortgage interest, and reporting goes on the annual income tax form. But additionally, state taxes may apply from the state that the rental property is located. Then there's this pre-2019 alimony tax. Before the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, alimony payments were deductible for the payer, but taxable to the recipient. Well, that changed in 2019. But however, child support is not considered taxable income, and therefore it's not deductible either. Then there's affiliate income tax, and that's money earned from affiliate marketing or online platforms. It's also considered taxable income. Of course, the rules vary state by state, but it also depends on the business structure. And then there's the gross receipts tax, levied on companies' total sales revenue without deductions for expenses, that's applied in some states to specific industries. For example, the District of Columbia imposes a gross receipt tax on utilities, cable television, satellite video relay, radio transmission, and other services. Then there are IRS interest charges and penalties. So the IRS imposes interest and penalties for late tax payments or underreporting. Interest accrues daily from the due date until payment, and penalties can include failure to file and failure to pay fees. These can stack up quickly and essentially taxing your tax. You need a breath yet? There's still more to go. Believe me, many more to go. Then there's the alternative minimum tax, the AMT. This was introduced in 1969 to prevent the ultra-wealthy from dodging tax via loopholes. So it created this parallel system to ensure a minimum amount was paid. Well, this supplemental income tax was established by Congress in order to ensure that wealthy households avoided the loopholes and paid more taxes. It applied to individuals, corporations, estates, and trusts that apply for certain benefits or exemptions. But as of the American Taxpayer Relief Act of 2012, the AMT is now tied to inflation to ensure that the middle-class families are not impacted too harshly on the AMT. So who are the ultra-wealthy? If they're concerned about the middle-class families being impacted. Again, alternative minimum tax sounds like a loophole in itself. And then there's the additional Medicare tax. Since 2013, high earners pay an extra 0.9% on income above $200,000 for a single filer, or $250,000 for married filing jointly. In today's economy, $250,000 may not be considered a high earner, since there are millionaires and billionaires who use those legal loopholes to dodge paying their share. So let's move on to inheritance, gifts, and estate taxes. So the estate tax in the federal view was established in 1916. This tax applied to the transfer of wealth after death, initially to generate revenue and address wealth inequality. This is a tax on a person's right to transfer their property at the time of their death. Now, this tax takes into account everything a person owns. Anything he's invested in at the time of death, his cash, securities, real estate, insurance, everything. And this is called the gross estate. And there's only a few deductions allowed, such as funeral expenses. So a certain amount is exempted depending on the year of the death. Now, that's something you have to look into for your own location. That's a little more complicated than I really want to get into. The initial exemption was $50,000, with rates ranging from 1 to 10%. Well, the exemption amount has increased over time. In 2016, it was $5.45 million. So something has changed in our tax laws very seriously for that rate to jump so dramatically. Then there's the state estate tax. So over a dozen states have their own estate tax, with often lower thresholds than the federal level, sometimes starting at like 1 million. And then some states also have an inheritance tax on top of that. So distinct from estate taxes, some states levy the tax on beneficiaries receiving assets from the deceased person's estate. Now, this again varies by state, but this means the person receiving the inheritance, the beneficiary, pays the tax, not the estate. Paying taxes on money that has already been taxed over the lifetime of the deceased? Wow. Now, the rates and exemptions, again, depend on the inheritor's relationship to the deceased. And there are only 6 states who impose this tax. But of course, my state of Maryland has both the estate and the inheritance taxes. Go figure. Then there's the gift tax, because they needed to figure out how to get your money either way. So the federal gift tax was enacted in 1924, repealed in 26, and then permanently established in 1932 to prevent avoidance of estate taxes by gifting assets before death. So similar to the estate tax, this applies to the transfer of the property from a living person without getting something in return of any compensation. So it's not a sale. So this tax is paid by the giver rather than the recipient. But again, you're taxing the money that's already been taxed. The IRS specifies that it doesn't apply to certain gifts, as donations to political organizations. You can pay tuitions, provide medical expenses, or a gift to a spouse. But there are limits. The donor can't give more than $14,000 per recipient in any calendar year, and this is based on 2016. So let's move on to the taxes on your property and wealth. So this is, again, property tax is also referred to as real estate tax, and we'll try to distinguish that a little bit. This dates back to colonial times, when property taxes were the primary revenue for local governments. They funded public services like education and infrastructure. So if the property tax collected by local governments are to fund schools, emergency services, and infrastructure, have you noticed any of these services improved in your areas? I can't say that I have. And yet property taxes increase as they appraise the value of the land and the buildings. All the money just keeps going up and up, how much the value is. And so your taxes go up accordingly. So the real estate tax, as I said, it's sometimes used interchangeably with property tax, but this also refers to the transfer taxes on the sale of real estate. So when you're buying real estate. But then again, you have personal property tax. Now, this applies in some states to like vehicle, boats, RVs, or even business equipment. This is paid annually, just like the real estate property tax. But this means you never really own the property, even when the purchase price is paid off, because you constantly have to pay a tax on it annually. Then there's the inventory tax. Well, some states tax the value of the business's inventory as part of personal property tax. Now, this can really impact businesses that hold large inventories. So the tax is calculated based on the value of the unsold goods at the end of the year. So that's why we have end of year inventory sales, to reduce the burden of the taxes on the businesses. So complex. We're going to move on to the taxes on consumptions and goods. So everybody probably is aware of sales tax, but did you know that Mississippi was the first state to adopt a sales tax in 1930? And by the end of the 1930s, 22 states had implemented sales tax, primarily as a response to revenue needs during the Great Depression. Yet, sales tax have increased in many states, even in years where there have been a fiscal surplus. Go figure. Then there is a use tax. You may not be aware of this, but if you buy out of state, especially online, and you don't pay sales tax, you're supposed to self-report and pay use tax. Use taxes are not enforced by states as rigorously as sales tax law. So the laws have changed, and in recent years, and now some states require the retailer to pay the uncollected tax for online purchases. So you may notice that places that you bought online that didn't charge tax now do, because they're recovering their own costs. Then there's the excise taxes. Now, the first federal excise tax was imposed on distilled spirits in 1791. So over time, excise taxes expanded to include items like tobacco, gasoline, and luxury goods, serving both as revenue and regulatory purposes. So one of them is the gasoline tax. So both federal and state governments impose per gallon taxes on fuel. As of now, Maryland, for example, taxes gas at 44.75 cents per gallon. Another one of those excise tax is cigarette tax. Now, this is imposed again by both federal and state levels, and they serve as a revenue source and public health measures to deter smoking. But that was in 1950. 40 states and District of Columbia had already implemented cigarette taxes. And I know in the 40s and 50s and 60s too, they weren't deterring cigarette smoking. They were advertising it as a healthy thing to do. So this seems like convoluted thinking to me. And then another excise tax is the liquor tax, and that's on all alcohol beverages. They're collected both at the federal and the state levels. Now, most states tax alcohol based on volume, so it's so much like per gallon. The rates vary widely by state and by the drink type, whether it's beer, wine, or spirits. And now these taxes serve as a revenue source, and they say the aim is to moderate consumption. Okay. Then there are luxury taxes. Now, these are imposed on goods that are deemed non-essential or high-end. Luxury taxes target items like expensive cars, jewelry, and boats. Well, the intent of this was to generate revenue from discretionary spending. It's bad enough they take it from your salary. Now, anything you got left over, you got to pay a tax on if you buy something that's a luxury. So the U.S. implemented a luxury tax in 1991 on automobiles and yachts, because why not? Then there are taxes on prize awards. Any merchandise, property, trips, or cash that a person wins are subject to federal taxes and must be filed on your annual form as additional income. Additionally, winners will have to report that income in their applicable states. So you go on Wheel of Fortune, you win the big prize, and before you get off stage, there's a revenue agent to meet you because they're going to take their share of taxes before you take your additional income. Let's move on to slides about taxes disguised as fees. So there's a marriage license. You're absolutely required to get a marriage license before a legal marriage ceremony is performed. The fees vary by state and they go to the general revenue or to fund family courts. Then you have driver's license or learner's permits. They're issued by the State Department of Motor Vehicles, and they're required to legally operate a vehicle. Now, again, the fees cover like administration, but they generate significant revenue because that is a big moneymaker. Then there are state IDs and the real ID. Now, this is not technically a license, but it does come with a fee, which is a tax. I encourage you to resist this one. Do your research, find out what it really is, and stay away from it. Then there are hunting and fishing licenses. Now, they're required to legally hunt or fish. Now, in Maryland, various licenses and stamps are available depending on the game you're targeting. Now, these funds are supposed to support wildlife conservation and management and public education programs. So let me ask you, how's the water, land, and wildlife management in your area? I question all these things. Then we have dog licenses or pet registrations. Now, they're required in many cities or counties if you own pets, especially dogs, with an exemption for service dogs. It's maintained that it helps control the stray animal population and track vaccines. So it's another way of ensuring you're following the allopathic veterinary medical model with your pet. Oh, well. And then there's the concealed carry permit. Now, many states require licensing to carry a concealed firearm with fees used for background checks and administration. Now, although the Second Amendment says you have the right to bear arms and it shall not be infringed, just see how many hoops you have to jump through in your state to carry a firearm. Then there are this bicycle license, and this is just in a few cities. It's rare now, but some places still require it because they say it's for theft deterrence and registration. Okay, that's their spin on it. Then there's a recreational vehicle, RVs, boat, snowmobile, they get permits or licenses. So you have registration fees that apply to RVs, but they also include ATVs and jet skis. And again, this is on an annual basis. So even when they're paid off, you're still paying your fees. Then we have professional licenses. Now, these are generally state regulated. These things include doctors, lawyers, nurses, engineers, architects, accountants, real estate brokers and agents, certified public accountants, contractors, and it's all trades, things like construction, plumbers, HVAC, electricians, all of them. Then we have insurance agents. People will sell life, health, or property insurance. Daycare providers, because they have to pay for their background checks and their safety compliance, and even funeral directors and embalmers. Often these require continuing education, testing, and renewal fees. There are even some security guards that need a license for private security work. Then there are occupational licenses for certain professional services like cosmetologists, barbers, tattoo artists, and even massage therapists. But then if you have a business, you need a business license. So that's a legal requirement to operate a business in most cities or counties. Of course, fees vary based on your business or how much revenue you have. And then there are taxi, limo, and chauffeur licenses. Now, this is a special license, and it's an endorsement beyond the driver's license, but it's required for commercial drivers who transport people for hire. Wow. So let's move on to one-time or conditional taxes. These are usually called permits, but they vary because all fees that you pay are a tax in some form. So It's a building permit tax, even though they'll call it a fee. This is required for new construction or major renovations. Fees help fund inspections and code enforcement. But have you had any experience with building inspectors? I'm not sure if this money is wisely spent. I've had that experience and I'm not seeing that it's working well. Then there are zoning permits. This ensures the property aligns with local zoning laws. Often it's required for changes in land use. It's your property. Well, maybe not if you're still paying property tax. But you can't use it as you wish without some government authorization. That's your zoning permit. Then there's a liquor license. So it's very expensive and is regulated because these licenses are required to sell or serve alcoholic beverages. Even after years, you just have to keep paying the renewal fee. And remember, the liquor is also taxed. Then there's the tobacco retailer license. It's required for selling tobacco products, which are also taxed. Then there's the food service license, which is required for restaurants, catering business, and food trucks and other vendors that sell food. This is said so they're in compliance with health regulations. In Maryland, this license is known as the Employee Health Permit. But then there's a separate vending license for mobile food carts and merchandise stands. And then there's health department permits, which are required for operating pools, spas, and tattoo parlors. It's just everything has a permit or a requirement that the government give you the okay that you can do it. Then there's the hazardous waste disposal permit. So businesses that generate hazardous waste need a special permit and pays associated fees. Yeah, well, how well is that working out? Then there are import and export permits, and this is required for international trade of regulated items. Now, these permits often include processing and security fees. Then there's a well permit tax. So in many places, if you're digging your own private well, it requires approval and a fee. Then there's the fuel permit tax. This is for commercial vehicles that are crossing state lines. So states cooperate through the International Fuel Tax Agreement, the IFTA, to simplify the tax reporting. But you can also have temporary permits if you have short-term operations. So they've thought of everything. Then there are watercraft registration taxes. So boats and personal watercraft must be registered within your state, and the fees are often tied to the size and the motor power. Then there's the maritime captain's or maritime license or captain's license, and these are required if you're going to captain a large boat or a commercial vessel. Then there are aircraft pilot licenses, mandatory for everybody who operates a plane or helicopter. I won't comment on how that industry is being decimated. Then you need a broadcasting license from the FCC if you have TV, radio, or even some internet providers. So let's move on to the transportation-related taxes and fees. Believe me, it seems like it goes on forever. So first you have your vehicle license registration tax. This is an annual renewable fee required for you to keep the car on the road, often tied to your vehicle's value or weight. Again, even when the car is paid off, you're still paying this tax. Then there's the vehicle sales tax. You pay when you purchase the vehicle, whether it's new or used. It's collected by the dealership or sometimes by the State Department of Motor Vehicles. Then there is a road usage tax. Now, this includes tolls and mileage-based fees. Now, newer models are proposing GPS-tracked road taxes to replace fuel taxes. No doubt, this has something to do with the increase in electric vehicles that don't pay fuel taxes because they're not going to the pump. Then there's the recreational vehicle tax. Now, this is similar to both the other one we talked about, well, RVs and similar vehicles. They're subject to both registration and special use taxes. Then there's commercial driver's license, the CDL. That's another tax that is obtained for a fee for an application, the testing, background checks, and issuing a license. Now, these fees vary by state, and they cover administrative costs associated with ensuring the driver meets specific standards for operating large commercial vehicles. Now, I don't know about you, but Maryland has specific restrictions and endorsements that affect this licensing process. So I suggest if you're a CDL driver or you want to be a CDL driver, that you check in your own state, because these taxes or fees can be pretty significant, and they could cause your business, if you're the operator, to have excessive costs that seem exceeding over and above what you would imagine. So at some point, I need to stop and take a drink. This has just been so many things to say about taxes and fees. So we have had so many incredible amounts of fees. I still have pages and pages of fees to go on. So let's look at what we're talking about on the next page is communication and utilities. Now, you're going to be surprised, because I really think people aren't aware that this is all on your bills as you get them. So part of your telephone taxes have multiple layers. So there's a federal excise tax, and this is a legacy tax that was originally created, you ready for this? To fund the Spanish-American War in 1898. But this tax is still applied in certain telecom services, even though its original purpose is long outdated. Then there's this universal service fee. Now, this fee supports nationwide access to communications in rural and low-income areas and public schools, and it's federally mandated by all phone users. Now, if you recall that in a previous podcast, I had mentioned that those fees to do, including rural and low areas, they were not doing those upgrades. The money somehow just seems to disappear. But then there's also state and local surcharges. They're added by the state and the municipal governments. So these charges help fund 911 emergency services, infrastructure upgrades, and regulatory commissions. Now, here's one that boggles the mind. They have a minimum usage fee. These fees are applied when a customer fails to meet the minimum usage threshold. It's a way for the telecom companies, and sometimes the government, to still extract revenue even with low call volume. But then you have recurring and non-recurring charges. So recurring charges are regular monthly taxes or fees, and non-recurring are one-time charges, often when you initiate a service or change your plans or move locations. Then there's usage charge. Now, this tax is based on the amount of actual services used, minutes, text, or data, and it can be taxed at varying rates depending on jurisdiction. So if you have a usage charge, why do you have a minimum charge? Seems like that's another double dip there. Just saying. Then there are utility taxes. Now, these are imposed on essential services like electricity, natural gas, water, and sewer. These taxes are usually embedded in your monthly utility bill and are collected by the provider on behalf of the state or local government to fund infrastructure, environmental programs, and general revenue. Then there's the service charge tax. Now, this is a catch-all category for miscellaneous fees that are taxed. It's often applied to services like internet, cable, trash collection, or administrative processing. While they may be labeled as fees, they're often, and they operate like taxes because they're mandatory and they're government imposed. So let's look at employment-related taxes that are non-income. So there is the federal unemployment tax, the FUTA. Now, this was passed in 1939 to fund federal unemployment insurance programs. It's federal tax that employers pay to fund unemployment benefits for workers who lose their job through no fault of their own. Employers pay and report the tax annually, and employees do not contribute. So that's one good thing. Then there's the state unemployment tax, the SUTA. This is the state level counterpart to the FUTA, but it's also paid by the employers. And this funds the state level unemployment programs. And again, rates vary by state and employer history. Then there's the workers' compensation tax. Now, this is a tax, again, paid by employers as part of the payroll expenses to cover insurance that provides medical care or lost wages for employees who are injured on the job. It's mandatory in most states, and it's based on the industry risk and the payroll size. So taxes are tools. They just aren't fees. They're used as forms of, they're tools of control. Oh. Let me just get back to talking about what we pay over our lifetime. So, do we know how many taxes we pay in a lifetime? I think the answer is just a lot. Some are obvious, some are not. And each one has a history that's tied to either war, recession, policy, or politics. So, according to a study by Self Financial, the average American will pay approximately $524,625 in taxes over their lifetime. Now, this represents about 34.7% of their total estimated lifetime earnings of $1,494,986. Well, this percentage varies significantly by state. For instance, residents of New Jersey are estimated to pay 54.3% of their lifetime earning in taxes, while those in Alaska pay about 24.5%. So it's important to note that these figures can fluctuate based on individual income levels, spending habits, and state-specific policies, but that's an enormous amount of money that is taken from your hard-earned dollars for every possible thing. So taxes touch every paycheck, every purchase, investment, and every life event. So this isn't just about dollars and cents. It's about ownership. It's about sovereignty. These taxes are designed to be invisible, automatic, and unquestioned. But once you start paying attention, you realize you're not just funding the system, you're fueling your own restriction. So understanding them is only step one. Step two is taking action. Learn the laws, read the fine print, challenge what doesn't sit right. There are legal ways to reduce your burden, protect your assets, and keep more of what you earn. But no one's going to hand that to you on a roadmap. You have to go and seek it. You have to choose to stop being passive and start being powerful. Because when you know the game is rigged, you stop playing by their rules and you start writing your own. Well, before I wrap up tonight, I've got something special to share. You're not going to want to miss an upcoming episode where I'll be joined by Sherry Peel Jackson. She's a former IRS agent who walked away from the system and now teaches people the truth and how it really works. She's bringing her deep insider knowledge to Sovereign Sisters podcast to talk about the legalities of income tax, IRS overreach, and what you can do to protect yourself. Whether you're skeptical, curious, or fired up, this is a conversation that will connect the dots. So make sure you're subscribed, hit the notification bell if you're watching YouTube or Rumble, and share this with somebody who's ready to learn what the system doesn't want you to know. And if you want to support my work, please support the people and the vendors I trust and endorse. These are businesses that align with our values, freedom, truth, and empowerment. And when you shop with them, you're not just spending, you're investing in sovereignty. So together, we build parallel systems, and together we rise. So thank you for listening. And until next time, God bless.